Hi everybody, this video is about the decolonization struggle and the civil war in Angola, 1956, from 1966 to 2002. If it is the first approach to Angola's complex history. Angola is a sub-Saharan African country, twice the size of France, is considered as a poor country with low human development. Colonized by Portugal from 1885 following the Berlin Conference, Angola was subjected to Portuguese colonial tutelage after several years of violence and repression carried out by the Portuguese. While Portugal officially considered the military conquest of Portugal to be completed in 1922, in reality the armed resistance of Angola continues over the years, with the Angolan people protesting against the expropriation of land and property of which they were victims: colonial taxation, racial oppression, and forced labors. Several popular revolts broke out on various occasions, notably in 1924, 1925, and 1959. During the Second World War, Angola demanded its independence like many other territories in Africa. However, it was only very late, in 1975, after more than 10 years of violence and long struggles, that the Angolans finally obtained their liberation from Portuguese colonial tutelage. No sooner had his independence been achieved than a long civil war began, which lasted until 2002. Angola is therefore the symbol of a country that has been battered, affected by protracted conflicts and endemic violence. How can we explain the long and painful nature of decolonization in Angola and the violence of post-colonial conflicts? What are the issues of this conflict? Angola's long struggle for decolonization. Among the European colonial powers, Portugal was the one that remained the latest and most obstinately attached to its colonies. The conservative and nationalist dictatorship of Salazar, based on the doctrine of Estado Novo, was characterized by a strong attachment to the Portuguese colonial empire. In 1951, Salazar proclaimed that Portugal's African colonies were officially attached and an integral part of the motherland. In the 1950s and 1960s, at the time when many colonies in Asia and then Africa were gaining independence, Portugal went against the tide of this movement, instead strengthening its tutelage over its overseas possession. This translates into increased settled colonization, increased economic investment in this settlement, and a total refusal to engage in a dialogue with the separatist movement for independence. The latter organizations themselves from 1950s onwards, creating several emancipation movements. In 1957, Angolan Then Roberto created the Union of People of Northern Angola, which in 1961 became the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, FNLA. At the same time, in 1956, another liberation movement was formed, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, PMLA. It is the result of the merge of several liberation movements that had emerged in previous years, such as the Angola's Communist Party. The Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola is led by Agostinho Neto, the son of a Methodist minister. He belonged to the social category of educated, colonized, middle class, those whom the colonizer condescendingly referred to as evaluated or educated native. He was part of the small elite of the colonized who had the opportunity to go to Portugal to study. In Lisbon, where he studied medicine, he frequented the small community of educated Angolans who had settled in France. His stay in Portugal contributed a lot to his awareness and political formation. In Portugal, Neto participated in Angolan nationalist movement and in a cultural movement that aimed to enhance traditional Angola's cultures. He wrote his own poem exalting Angolan cultures. He also published a collection of poems, Sagrada Esperanza, Sacred Hope, published years before his country's independence. In his return to Angola, Neto continued his independence activities. His activism led to his being thrown in prison in 1916 by the Portuguese. He spent 2 years in detention, first in Cape Verde and then in Portugal, succeeding in escaping. He went to Morocco, from where he became head of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. In February 1961, the PMLA launched the national liberation struggle. The Portuguese authorities stubbornly refused any dialogue with the separatists, response with violent repression. From 1965 onwards, liberation struggle intensified. The Portuguese authority responded by sending an increasing number of armed forces and by devoting an increasing large part of the national budget to this colonial war. For its part, the Angolan independence movement have been weakened by internal division. The division between the PMLA and the FNLAs has been joined by the creation of a third competing movement, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, founded between 1963 and 1966 by a former members called Jonas Savimbi. This division in the Angolan liberation movement can be explained in large part by the state of the Cold War. While the PMLA, with its Marxist tendencies, was supported by the USSR and Cuba. UNITA was favored by the United States is an anti-communist movement. The leader of UNITA, Jonas Savimbi, is an Angolan from the same social background as Agostinho Neto, the son of an evangelical pastor working for Angola's colonial railway company. He also stayed in Lisbon as part of his medical studies. He continued to travel, going to Switzerland to study political science at the University of Lausanne, and then to the People's Republic of China to study guerrilla technique. On his return, far from having becoming a Maoist, Savimbi became anti-communist and social democratic. Approached by the United States, is agreed to rally their ideological orientation and in exchange received their support and help in the creation of his movement, UNITA. The liberation struggle in Angola are therefore a perfect illustration of the issue of decolonization and the stake of the Cold War. Carnation Revolution in Portugal, 1974, trigger for Angola's independence. In April 1974, the Carnation Revolution in Portugal put an end to the dictatorial regime of Salazar and truce to the brutal repression carried out by the Portuguese army in Angola. In Lisbon, overthrowing the dictatorship of Caetano, a new military government was set up. The movement of armed force, including socialists. The new leader, Mario Soares, set out behind the colonial wars and complete the process of decolonization. Negotiations were then conducted in London and Algiers between representatives of the Portuguese authorities and the leaders of the Angolan liberation movement. The date of Angola's declaration of independence was 11 November 1975. A ceasefire was proclaimed in mid-October 1974, but it took place in a climate of great violence between the many settlers of European origin who had settled there, at least 1 million inhabitants, and the Angolan community. The following war in 1975, the settlers were repatriated to Portugal as a matter of urgency by means a gigantic airlift set up from Luanda by the Portuguese authority mainly between May and November 1975. About 90% of the white population left the country in the space of few months, leaving the infrastructures built by the Portuguese abandoned and sometimes even deliberately destroying it before their departures. About 700,000 retornados flocked to Portugal in a difficult economic context. Means that the crisis of a crisis economic resulting from the oil crisis in 1973 and in often precarious material condition. Its return in Portugal in very, very, very difficult situation. The outbreak of the Angolan Civil War. The civil war that began at the same time that the country's independence had its motives in decolonization and the Cold War. The Portuguese authorities officially unwilling to choose which of the Angolan independence movement would come to power at independence, entered into talk with the three main movements, the PMLA, the VNLA, and UNITA. On January 10, 1975, the Alvor agreements were signed jointly between the representatives of its free movement and the Portuguese authorities, which provide for the country's independence by 11 November 1975, and in the meantime, the establishment of a transitional government by January 1975. Free movements are tearing each other apart for power. Agostinho Neto sees the FNLA and UNITA as offshoot of colonialism and imperialism because the FNLA is moderate and UNITA is supported by the United States. He believes that this movement should be fought in the same way as the Portuguese colonial authorities. Agostinho Neto sees the PMLA as an emancipatory movement for the Angolan people and the only one capable of building a society where man is no longer exploited by man. With logistical help from the USSR and Cuba, the PMLA quickly gained the upper hand over the other two movements. 11 November 1975, Agostinho Neto proclaims the People Republic of Angola. He appointed himself president and established a pro-Soviet government. Power was transferred to the PMLA and the new regime was recognized by many countries. But FNLA and UNITA refused to take power by the MPLA. They are supported by the Republic of South Africa. November 1975, South Africa troops have massed on the border between South Africa and Angola, ready to launch an offensive to topple the PMLA. The USSR then issues an ultimatum to the Republic of South Africa, which renounced its offensive. A few days later, South Africa invaded southern Angola in support of UNITA's offensive against the PMLA. At the same time, Alden Roberto, leader of the FLNA with the support of Zairian troops, launched a military offensive aimed at taking Luanda. He suffered a defeat at the Battle of Kifangondo, which resulted in the FNLA being permanently eclipsed from the Angola political scene. In 1976, Alden Roberto was forced into exile in France and then in Zaire. It was therefore above all Jonas Savimbi's UNITA that began the fight against the PMLA, threatening a veritable civil war, the beginning of which coincides with the proclamation of Angola's independence. For years, UNITA and PMLA would clash in a merciless civil war, the first movement enjoying the support of the United States and its Western allies, such as the United Kingdom, France, and Israel, and several African countries in the region. And the second could count on the support of the USSR, the country of Eastern Europe and Cuba. It is therefore the Cold War that is unfolding indirectly in Angola. A long and bloody civil war. The civil war is dividing the Angolan people themselves. On the side of UNITA, pro-American members of Ovimbundu ethnic group, which include about 40% of the population, are ghettoed, while the PMLA, pro-communist, is made up of mixed race and urban drillers. The divide is also reflected geographically. The PMLA is stronger in the west of the country, on the coastal side, which is more urban, more industrialized, more modern, while UNITA is more established in the east, the most rural and traditional hinterland. In 1976, Fidel Castro launched a large-scale operation determined to deploy great means to help the PMLA resist attack by UNITA and neighboring countries. He sent thousands of Cuban soldiers to Angola. It was Operation Carlota. About 1,000 Cuban soldiers gradually land in Angola by means of airlift financed by the USSR. These Cuban troops, commanded by General Ochoa, benefiting from modern military equipment provided by the USSR and aid by the Soviet Air Force, lent a hand to those of Agustino Neto and able the PMLA to defeat the Zairian troops and stop the UNITA offensive. In Western public opinion, Operation Carlota is frightening. The inhabitants and magazine and all media ask if Africa is going to turn red. The Reds speak of Soviet and Cuban expansionism in Africa. It is true that Cuba's intervention in Angola allowed the communist power and in particular the USSR to extend its influence and prestige in Africa in the face of the United States, which at that time was weakened internationally by the Watergate scandal. In those years, the growing influence of the USSR and Cuba in Africa was also measured by the intervention of Cuban soldiers in Mozambique and Ethiopia, and by the establishment of pro-Soviet regime in Ethiopia with the accession of Mengistu to the presidency in 1977. Economically, the growing Soviet influence in Africa ensured access to the great sea routes of the Cape of Good. The PMLA leadership gradually extended its control over a growing part of the country's territories, but was unable to completely defeat the UNITA's guerrilla, which continued for many years. The conflict even extended to Zaire. NATO launched a military operation in the Sabah region, and in order to put pressure on that country, which support UNITA, NATO flooded many of their mining facilities, thus rendering them non-operational. The dictatorship of NATO. Agostinho Neto gradually set up a dictatorship modeled on the Soviet model in the part of Angola controlled by the PMLA. It carried out nationalization such as the one of the media in 1976. This allowed them to control the information. In addition, the PMLA was set up as a single party from a liberation movement. It became an all-powerful and repressive party state. Due to the emergency situation linked to the civil war, freedom of expression is not respected. The regime became even more rigid from 1977 onwards following an attempted coup against Agostinho Neto. He then purged the PMLA of fractional and then granted himself full power. Sick and weakened, Neto was transported to Moscow for treatment. He died in September 1979. José Eduardo dos Santos succeeded him as leader of the PMLA and as head of the country, of the state. The decade of Dos Santos, and Dos Santos tried to is doing effort to calm the situation during a decade during 1979 to 1989. Dos Santos gradually tried to calm the situation, and he met a lot of difficulties. For example, as the conflict continued with recurrent invasion by the South African Army into Angola territories in 1981, 84, 85, and 87. And in 1979, Savimbi set up his headquarters in Jamba, a town created by UNITA in the southeast of the country, not far from the border with Zambia. UNITA is supported by the racist regime in South Africa, which supply it with weapon, equipment, and soldiers via Namibia and Zambia. Then in January 1984, South Africa undertook to evacuate its troops from Angola in exchange for Dos Santos' promise on behalf of the PMLA to increase its support for SWAPO, a Namibian Marxist-Leninist independence movement which had set up its hears base in Angola with the approval of the PMLA. But while Dos Santos is leading effort to appease the situation, Savimbi is waging a ruthless guerrilla war, forcibly conscripting Angolan women and children and not hesitating to burn alive his opponent within his own party. In addition, from 1985 onwards, US support for Angola was strengthened and formalized. At that time, thanks to military assistance provided by the United States, UNITA controlled several provinces of the country. UNITA is also financed by illegal diamond trafficking. In the country, the social and human consequences are being felt more and more clearly. A lot of refugees driven from their village devastated by clash and massacre and flocking to the capital where huge slums are forming. The agricultural and mining sector of the country's economy were ravaged by civil war. Cuba's essential war. Cuba also provides significant logistical and military assistance to Angola. In the early 1980s, 10,000 Cubans were present in Angola helping in the construction of infrastructure, school, hospital, administrative building. Cuba supports not only the liberation struggle in Angola but also the parallel struggle in Zambia and Rhodesia. Secondary schools were even built in Cuba especially to accommodate and train Angolan, Ethiopian, and Mozambican students. In all, 500,000 Cubans worked in Africa in support of African people between 60s to 80s. Between 1975 and 1989, more than 2,000 Cubans were killed in fighting in Africa. Battle of Kyoto, Cuanavale, January 1988. The battle pits PMLA troops against UNITA troops at a former NATO airbase in southeastern Angola. The largest battle in terms of number of combatants on the continent since the Second World War. PMLA success, South Africa's image is tarnished. After the battle involved the independence of Southern Rhodesian and Namibia, actual Namibia, and the withdrawal of Cuban troops from Angola. In 14 points, agreement was concluded the 20 July 1988 between Angola, Cuba, and South Africa. The three partners are committed to respecting UN Resolution 455, which provides for election in Namibia in exchange for the withdrawal of Cuban troops. In August of the same year, South Africa and SWAPO agreed to a cessation of hostility, led to the Ruacana Peace Agreement in August between Angola and South Africa. Later, in December 1988, peace agreement signed in New York between Angola, Cuba, and the apartheid regime of South Africa. Agreement links the withdrawal of Cuban troops from Angola to the withdrawal of South African troops from Angola at the accession of Namibia to independence. In 1990, the PMLA officially renounced Marxism-Leninism and embraced democratic socialism and a diversified economy. Years later, peace accord between Savimbi of UNITA and Dos Santos of PMLA provide for free election for the following years. September 1992, organization of free and democratic election under the supervision of the United States. Dos Santos, Secretary General of the PMLA, was elected President of the Republic with 49% of the vote against 40% for the UNITA. Considered this election as corrupt, and he launched a military offensive from the country, and it is a resumption of the civil war. but is not longer supported by the United States and South Africa. Now, United States is closing in on Dos Santos. Jonas Savimbi is held responsible for the resumption of the civil war by United Nations, and the member of the UNITA force are integrated in the Angolan regular army in November 1994. In 1997, in order to establish peace in the country, a government of unity and national resolution has been implemented under the supervision of the United Nations mission in Angola. Is isolated internationally and has lost the support of Zaire and Congo-Brazzaville. Jonas Savimbi died in 2002, and it is the end of the Civil War too. The duration of its civil war is about 27 years, and about 500,000 and 1 million of persons died during this war. After the end of the civil war, the country tried to reintegrate refugees and veterans. And to clean the territory of personal mine. There's about more than 10 million of anti-personal mine in the territory, and try to do the reconstruction of agriculture's activities. And there's a lot of Chinese who are doing investment in the country. There's a lot of inequality in the capital and between the modern construction and the slum. The inequality continued to grow up. After the war, the government of Angola has followed the recommendation of the international financial institution as EFM or World Bank to be later and follow the recommendation, for example, restriction of the budget, liberalization of foreign trade, privatization of public enterprise. Angola has been considered after a decade of EMF intervention as a good student, and has been received congratulations of his institution. But its method, its recommendation of the EMF and the World Bank have not reduced corruption. Above all, the neoliberal orientation have dramatically increased inequality in the country and the poverty of the greatest number. About 70% of Angolan population live below the poverty line, and the natural resources and the natural resources are controlled by Western firms, for example, the Angola oil production. And in 2007, the government decided to abandon its neoliberal orientation. To conclude, what can we say? We can say that it's very important of knowing about the armed struggle in Angola to better understand the issues at stake in colonial and post-colonial conflict and their interweaving with those of the Cold War. Thank you so much for your attention, for your passion with my French accent and French pronunciation in English. Here you can see a very short bibliography about this topic. Thank you so much.